21. Black R&B legends who had secret gay relationships. What if I told you some of the most romantic Black R&B voices in history were forced to hide their real love to survive? Not because they lacked courage, but because the world, the church, and the industry would have crushed them for telling the truth. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on secret relationships, coded songs, and the price of fame in a time when being openly gay could end everything. If you want history that's powerful, respectful, and real, subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence like this video and watch to the end, because every name on this list will change how you hear the classics. Big Mama Thornton. Few performers in 20th century black music carried authority like Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton. Born in Ayrton, Alabama in 1926, she grew up singing in church, learned to play harmonica and drums, and headed to Houston while still a teenager. There, she joined rough and ready R&B revues, earning a reputation for a voice that could cut through any room. Her career-defining hit came in 1952 when she recorded Hound Dog. Thornton's version was a hard blues shout packed with humor and warning at once, and it landed on the charts years before pop audiences heard a cleaner cover. Even when others later made bigger money from the song, the original pulse and attitude belonged to her. On stage, Thornton wore roomy suits, sharp hats, and often held a cigar, performing with a masculine confidence that looked natural, not theatrical. People close to her, and many blues historians, describe her as a lesbian who shared her life with women in private, choosing discretion because the era offered black queer artists little protection. If your livelihood depended on playing a safe role for the public, would you still risk telling the truth about who you love? Her path was never easy. Royalties were thin. Managers were unreliable, and shifting trends pushed her away from major stages. Yet she kept recording and touring into the late 1970s, her voice aging into a deeper rasp without losing force. Big Mama Thornton's legacy is more than one famous record. It's the blueprint of fearless presence, an artist who refused to shrink her sound, her style, or her desire for anyone. Frankie Beverly. Howard Stanley. Frankie Beverly was the quiet architect of a sound that felt like a family reunion every summer. Born in Philadelphia on December 6, 1946, he started in local vocal groups, then formed Raw Soul in the late 1960s. After relocating to San Francisco, a pivotal connection with and led to the band's new name, Maze. From there, Beverly built a catalog that stayed on black radio and in backyard cookouts for decades. Records like Golden Time of Day, Joy, and Pain, Back in Stride, and especially Before I Let Go. A song so durable it became a generational anthem and was later reintroduced to younger listeners through Beyoncé's 2019 cover. Maze earned of and a touring legacy defined by the famous all-white concert tradition, with audiences dressing in white to match Beverly's signature stage look. Unlike many stars, Beverly guarded his personal world fiercely. He gave interviews about music, faith, and gratitude, but rarely about romance, and he never publicly discussed his sexuality. Over the years, whispers circulated in fan circles and memoirs about close male companionship on the road. Yet no mainstream definitive biography confirms a specific long-term same-sex partner. In March 2024, he announced his I Wanna Thank You farewell tour, September 10th, 2024, at age 77. What remains undeniable is the emotional shelter his music provided. Steady grooves, tender storytelling, and a voice that made joy feel reachable. Frankie Beverly didn't chase trends, he created traditions. Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Born Rosetta Nubin in Cotton Plant, Arkansas in 1915, was a spark that helped light the fuse for rock and roll. Raised in the Church of God in Christ, she learned guitar as a child and sang with a shout that felt like a revival and a Saturday night club at once. In the late 1930s, she began touring widely, carrying gospel into theaters and onto radio. Songs such as This Train Didn't It Rain and the 1944 crossover Strange Things Happening Every Day revealed a musician who could testify and swing, sanctify, and scorch without blinking. Her electrified, picking, rhythmic chug and fearless stagecraft became a template later embraced by generations of performers who rarely gave her full credit. Her personal world, though, unfolded under strict religious and social pressure. Tharp married men, yet her most important artistic bond was with fellow gospel star Marie Knight. During the late 1940s, they traveled together, shared arrangements, and recorded the jubilant "Up Above My Head." Many listeners hear more than musical chemistry in that partnership, and some later writers suggest their closeness may have carried romantic meaning. Still, the historical record offers no public confession or surviving letters that settle the question either way, so her intimacy with Knight remains part history, part careful inference. When the cost of being seen is everything you've built, who decides what your silence means? Health troubles in the early 1970s slowed her down, and she died in 1973. What remains unmistakable is her courage. A black woman, guitar in hand, rewriting the rulebook in real time for every guitarist who followed. Patrice Rushen. Patrice Rushen is a rare kind of musical polymath, pianist, composer, producer, bandleader, and one of the most elegant architects of late 70s, 80s black groove. Born in Los Angeles in 1954, she was a gifted classical pianist before she was old enough to drive. By her teens, she was already playing jazz with veterans, and in the mid-1970s, she signed with Prestige Records, releasing sophisticated fusion albums that showcased her keyboard virtuosity. Her mainstream breakthrough arrived after moving to Elektra, Haven't You Heard 1979, became a dance floor staple, and turned her into a crossover star, later sampled in dozens of songs and anchoring Will Smith's Men in Black in 1997. Across her career, she has earned multiple Grammy nominations, scored film and TV projects, and served as musical director for the Grammy Awards, the first woman to hold that role. Because Rushen's public image was always carefully professional, more about musicianship than celebrity gossip, her private life stayed largely out of headlines. The video you shared claims she had a long hidden relationship with a female dancer and married a man to quiet rumors. However, reliable biographies and major interviews do not conclusively verify a specific same-sex partner or a marriage for cover. What can be said with confidence is that she worked during a period when black women in R&B were expected to appear heterosexual, glamorous, and marketable, which often pushed any non-conforming identity into silence. What's undeniable is her legacy. Rushen helped define the sophisticated, joyful side of urban contemporary music, pairing jazz harmony with R&B bounce. Whether behind the keys or behind the boards, she built a sound that still feels timeless, warm, precise, and quietly revolutionary. Luther Vandross. Luther Ronzoni Vandross, Jr. April 20th, 1951. July 1st, 2005, stands among the great architects of contemporary black soul. Raised in New York City, he first made his name behind the scenes as a songwriter, arranger, and background vocalist, polishing his craft with artists such as David Bowie, Roberta Flack, Chaka Khan, and Bette Midler. When he stepped forward, the world followed. His solo breakthrough, Never Too Much, 1981, went platinum and launched an extraordinary streak. More than 40 million records sold worldwide, 11 consecutive platinum albums, and 8 Grammy Awards. Few singers could shape a melody with such control, stretching a single word into a whole emotional memory. In 2003, Dance with My Father became his most personal hit, winning major awards and reaffirming his place as the era's premier balladeer. Yet the man who voiced romance for millions guarded his own private life with iron discipline. Vandross never married, had no children, and refused to turn interviews into confessions. Speculation about his sexuality followed him for decades, but he never accepted a public label, living in a time when a gay identity could have poisoned radio support and shattered the carefully marketed ladies' man image. If your career depended on strangers believing a certain love story about you, would you risk telling a different one? Friends later described him as gay, but Luther chose privacy to the end, leaving the public with music rather than explanations. A stroke in 2003 limited his mobility, but not his artistry. He returned to record and perform until complications from stroke, diabetes, and hypertension ended his life at 54. What remains is his voice, warm, exact, and timeless, still teaching listeners how to hold love gently, even when life demands silence. Teddy Pendergrass. Theodore de Rees. Pendergrass. March 26, 1950, January 13, 2010, rose from Philadelphia's church and street corners to become one of soul music's defining male voices. He first broke through as the powerhouse drummer turned lead for Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes' driving hits like If You Don't Know Me By Now. Going solo in 1977, he crafted a brand of romantic intensity that felt both tender and commanding. Albums such as Teddy Pendergrass' Life is a Song Worth Singing and TP produced staples, Close the Door, Love TKO, Turn Off the Lights, and made him a staple of late 70s and early 80s R&B. At his commercial peak, he was among the genre's top-selling touring acts, known for shows that blended velvet balladry with barn-burning funk. His life changed overnight on March 18, 1982, when a car crash left him paralyzed from the waist down. The accident involving Tenica Watson, a transgender woman, set off a storm of tabloid speculation about his sexuality. Pendergrass never publicly clarified those rumors, choosing instead to focus on recovery and music. That silence became part self-protection, part insistence on dignity. What is verifiable is that he resumed recording, founded the Teddy Pen to support people with spinal cord injuries, and returned to the stage with astonishing resolve. He later married and remained loved across generations, not for gossip, but for a voice that could ache, plead, and promise in the same breath. Teddy's story is ultimately about survival, a man who lost mobility, yet refused to lose meaning, leaving behind songs that still sound like late-night truth. Johnny Mathis. Johnny Mathis has long been called the voice of romance, but his career is also a story of discipline, crossover brilliance, and quiet self-protection. Born John Royce Mathis on September 30, 1935 in Gilmer, Texas, and raised in San Francisco, he first looked destined for sports, an elite high jumper who nearly pursued Olympic trials. Music won out. In 1957, he exploded with Wonderful, Wonderful, and Chances Are, then became a household name in the LP era. His 1958 release, Johnny's Greatest Hits, stayed on Billboard's album chart for 490 weeks, an unprecedented run at the time, and helped define what a greatest hits record could be. Over the decades, he recorded pop standards, jazz, soul-leaning ballads, and holiday classics, building a catalog of nearly 80 albums and earning a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2003. Yet the public brand that sold dreamy love songs also built a cage. In 1982, a magazine quoted him acknowledging homosexuality. He later retracted the remark and received threats, choosing thereafter to keep interviews centered on music rather than personal labels. If one sentence could endanger your life and livelihood, would you speak it anyway? For years, he avoided the subject publicly. Only in 2017, in a calm and matter-of-fact way, did he confirm he is gay, noting he had dated men and women, but never married. In 2025, citing age and memory challenges, Mathis retired from live performing with a final concert on May 18th in Englewood, New Jersey. His legacy endures in the way his voice still soundtracks anniversaries, slow dances, and late-night solitude across generations. Ruth Brown. Ruth Alston Weston Brown, 1928-2006, was a pillar of Atlantic Records' early rise and a defining shaper of Black R&B's first golden age. Raised in Portsmouth, Virginia, she grew up on gospel harmony, but slipped out at 17 to sing in clubs, refusing a life limited by respectability. In Washington, D.C., bandleader Blanche Calloway recruited her, coached her phrasing, and took her on the road. A devastating 1948 car crash kept Brown in the hospital for months. From that bed, she signed with Atlantic and soon became its biggest star. Between 1949 and 1955, she delivered 21 R&B top 10 singles, with 5 reaching number 1, including Teardrops from My Eyes, 5'10", 15 Hours, and Mama, He Treats Your Daughter Mean. Those records helped keep the label afloat and earned her the title Miss Rhythm, a nickname that captured her buoyant timing and conversational warmth. Away from microphones, Brown kept intimacy private. She married twice, and later anecdotes from friends and some writers suggest she may have had relationships with women as well, but the documentation is incomplete, and Brown never publicly confirmed any same-sex partner. In her later years, she returned as a sly, scene-stealing actress on Broadway and television, then became a fierce advocate for musicians' royalties, helping change industry rules for veteran artists. Her legacy endures in the swing of her delivery, the emotional honesty of her catalog, and the doors she quietly forced open. Dinah Washington. Dinah Washington. August 29, 1924. December 14, 1963 was a vocal lightning strike, small in stature, enormous in command. Born Ruth Lee Jones in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and raised on Chicago's South Side, she first sang gospel in church before stepping into the jazz clubs that were shaping a new black nightlife. Lionel Hampton hired her in the mid-1940s, renaming her Dinah Washington, and she quickly proved she could do everything. Torch songs, blues, jazz standards, jump R&B, even early pop. By the 1950s, she was a chart force. Baby, You've Got What It Takes. 1959, crossed to the pop top 10, and her signature What a Difference a Day Makes won the 1959 Grammy for Best Rhythm and Blues Performance, one of the earliest Grammy wins by a black woman in the category. Her phrasing was sharp as a razor, yet she could soften a line into velvet without losing pulse. Washington's private life was turbulent. She married multiple times, often to men who struggled to handle her fame and independence. She also fought alcohol and prescription drug dependence, a battle common in an era with little real support for touring artists. Stories have circulated for decades about her possibly loving women as well as men, but there is no definitive public documentation from Dinah herself confirming a same-sex partner, so those claims remain unverified. If your life was already a storm, would you let the public into your most fragile room? On December 14, 1963, she died in Detroit from an accidental overdose involving prescription drugs and alcohol, only 39 years old. Even so, her influence is immortal. Aretha Franklin, Etta James, and countless soul singers learned from her fearless mix of elegance, grit, and emotional truth. Billy Preston. Billy Preston, September 2, 1946, June 6, 2006, was one of the most joyful and versatile musicians to ever move through black popular music. A Houston-born prodigy, he was playing piano in church as a child and performing on national stages before his teens. His gift wasn't just speed or technique, it was spark. Preston brought a churning, gospel-soaked groove to everything he touched, whether he was standing under a spotlight or sitting quietly behind somebody else's star. By the early 1960s, he was touring with Ray Charles, absorbing the discipline of the road and the language of soul. Soon after, he became a first-call keyboard force for a staggering range of artists from Sam Cooke to Sly and the Family Stone. He's often called the fifth Beatle because of his crucial role on their late-era sessions and rooftop concert. But Preston never belonged to one band. He belonged to music itself. As a solo artist, he scored major hits like Nothing from Nothing, 1974, number 1 on the Billboard, Hot 100, Will It Go Round in Circles, 1973, and You Are So Beautiful, 1974, songs that fused church exuberance with radio sweetness. Preston's adulthood was marked by intense highs and painful lows, addiction struggles, legal troubles, and health decline, including kidney disease. He kept his private life mostly sealed. Reports after his death suggested he was gay or bisexual, but he never publicly defined himself, likely aware of the era's harsh penalties for honesty. He died in 2006 at 59, leaving behind a legacy of uplift rhythmic invention and the unmistakable feeling of sunlight and sound. Billy Wright. Billy Wright, born William Wright in Atlanta in 1918 and known on the Chitlin circuit as the Prince of the Blues, was a daring jump blues shouter whose influence far outweighed his brief chart run. He started in gospel as a boy, then moved into traveling tent shows where drag performance comedy and showmanship blended with early rhythm and blues. Those years shaped his flamboyant stagecraft, heavy makeup, glittering outfits, and a fearless, high-spirited delivery that made audiences lean forward before he even sang a note. In 1949, he scored his biggest success with Blues for My Baby, which climbed to number 3 on the R&B chart, followed by other charting singles like You Satisfy Stacked Deck and Hey Little Girl. Wright was also openly gay in an era when that honesty required nerve, especially for a black male performer in the South. Rather than soften himself, he doubled down on spectacle and charisma, turning every appearance into a statement of self-possession. If you had to choose between safety and being fully seen, which would you pick? That question helps explain why his presence mattered so much to younger artists, searching for permission to be different. Most famously, Wright became a mentor to a teenage Little Richard, guiding him toward his first recording opportunity in 1951 and shaping the look that later defined Richard's early stardom: pancake makeup, tall pompadour, and a theatrical gender-bending swagger. As rock and roll surged, Wright's recording career slowed, but he kept working Atlanta stages for decades. After a stroke, his health declined. He died in 1991. Today, his legacy lives in the DNA of rock soul and queer black performance, proof that innovation often comes from the boldest corners of the room. Esquerita. Esquerita, born SQ. Reader Jr. in Greenville, South Carolina. Most sources give 1935, some 1938, was a rocket at the piano during rock and roll's earliest, wildest years. Raised on Baptist gospel, he learned keys by ear, and while still a teenager, became the house sensation at Greenville's Owl Club. His style fused sanctuary heat with juke joint grit, slashing right hand runs a freight train left hand, and a voice that could leap from sly croon to ecstatic howl in a single bar. Guitarist Paul Peek discovered him around 1958 and steered him toward Capitol Records. The singles that followed Oh Baby Rockin' the Joint and Hey Miss Lucy were fearless high-voltage performances that sounded like the future arriving early. Visually, he was just as daring: pancake makeup, rhinestone sunglasses, and towering wigs beneath a sky-high pompadour, turning every set into a theatrical explosion. He was openly gay within his community, and multiple biographers describe him as a crucial template for Little Richard's later flamboyant rock persona. He kept recording through the 1960s in Nashville, New Orleans, Detroit, and New York, sometimes sharing studio space with rising players like Jimi Hendrix and Dr. John. In the early 1970s, he reconnected with Little Richard, contributing songs to Richard's comeback album, The Real Thing, but the commercial spotlight never swung back. By the mid-1980s, he was struggling in New York City. Esquerita died in Harlem on October 23, 1986, from AIDS-related complications, leaving behind a bold sound and image that helped shape rock long before rock properly remembered his name. Carl Bean. Carl Bean, 1944-2021, carved out a singular place in black gospel and LGBTQ history by refusing to separate faith from identity. Born in Baltimore and raised in a strict Pentecostal environment, he spent his youth feeling called to ministry while simultaneously fearing rejection for who he was. After moving to Los Angeles, he pursued music and preaching side by side, believing the church could be widened rather than abandoned. That conviction came to life in his landmark 1977 recording I Was Born This Way, a soaring, disco-tinged gospel statement that affirmed queer existence at a time when such words were nearly unheard in sacred music. The song later became an anthem within black gay communities and a foundational text for spiritual self-acceptance. Bean's ministry grew just as boldly. In the early 1980s, he founded the Unity Fellowship Church movement, a denomination created specifically to welcome LGBTQ Christians, especially Black believers who felt exiled from traditional congregations. From a small Los Angeles-based Unity, expanded to multiple cities in the U.S. and abroad, offering worship that held holiness and human truth in the same embrace. His leadership extended beyond the pulpit into HIV/AIDS activism and community care during the epidemic's most devastating years. He lived much of his romantic life privately, but those close to him have described a long-term partnership that he kept out of headlines to protect both church work and personal safety. Have you ever had to choose between belonging and being fully yourself? That crossroads shaped much of Bean's path. By the time of his passing in 2021, Carl Bean had left a double legacy, a timeless song of affirmation and a living institution that continues to shelter people who once believed God had no room for them. Labi Siffre. Claudius Afolabi Labi Siffre, born in West London on June 25, 1945, is a Black British singer-songwriter whose art braided soul folk and jazz into a quietly revolutionary body of work. He emerged in the early 1970s with intimate conversational records, such as Bless the Telephone and Crying, Laughing, Loving, Lying, delivering lyrics like short stories, observant, humane, and slightly mischievous. Even when his name stayed off the front page, his melodies traveled widely. It Must Be Love became a UK hit in 1971 and later reached new heights through Madness, while other songs were rediscovered by younger listeners decades later through sampling and film soundtracks. In 1985, after seeing televised images of apartheid brutality, Siffre returned from a self-imposed retreat to write Something Inside So Strong. Released in 1987, it rose to number 4 in Britain and turned into a global hymn of resistance. The song's backbone came from South Africa's fight, but its heartbeat also drew on his own life as a gay Black man navigating prejudice at home. Siffre's love life carried the same steadiness. He met Peter Carver Lloyd in July 1964, and they shared 48 years together, entering a civil partnership in 2005 as soon as the law allowed. After Lloyd's death in 2013, Siffre later formalized a partnership with Rudolf van Baardwijk. Now living mainly in Spain, he remains a late-blooming icon, an example of how a soft voice, when honest, can echo for generations. Sylvester. Sylvester James Jr. September 6, 1947, December 16, 1988, was a radiant force who turned disco into a sanctuary for Black queer freedom. Raised in Los Angeles in a strict Pentecostal home, he first learned to sing in church choirs where emotion mattered more than polish. But it was San Francisco that unlocked his destiny. After joining the gender-bending performance troupe, the Cockettes, in the early 1970s, Sylvester stepped out as a solo artist and built a sound that mixed gospel fervor with futuristic dance energy. His breakthrough album Step 2, 1978, launched him into worldwide attention. The singles Dance Disco Heat and You Make Me Feel Mighty Real didn't simply top dance charts. They became declarations of joy for people who rarely saw themselves celebrated in public. His soaring falsetto and flamboyant style were inseparable satin sequins, and a smile that dared anyone to deny his humanity. Sylvester was openly gay at a time when that honesty could shrink a career, especially for a Black man in mainstream pop. If the world told you to dim your light, would you still choose to shine? That question sits inside every beat he ever sang. As disco faded from major radio after 1979, Sylvester kept thriving in clubs, touring relentlessly for the community that loved him back. He worked closely with producer Patrick Cowley on high NRG records like Do You Wanna Funk, pushing dance music toward the electronic future. When AIDS began devastating his circle, he became a visible supporter of fundraising and care. Diagnosed himself, he remained outspoken and directed future royalties to AIDS and homelessness charities. He died in 1988 at 41, leaving a legacy that still feels like pure liberation on the dance floor. Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles, 1955-2014. Didn't just play records, he rewired nightlife. Born Francis Warren Nichols Jr. in the Bronx, he came up in 1970s New York disco alongside his close friend Larry Levan, learning to steer a crowd at spaces like the Continental Baths and the Gallery. When Knuckles relocated to Chicago in 1977, his residency at the Warehouse became the lab for a new sound. By extending disco breaks, layering drum machine pulses, and stitching together soul funk and European synth cuts, he helped turn late-night DJ edits into what the city soon called house music, named after the club where it was born. Unlike a conventional hitmaker, Knuckles' influence traveled through speakers and dance floors. His productions and remixes such as Jamie Principle's Baby Wants to Ride Tears with Robert Owens and countless club reworks set the early Chicago template, four-on-the-floor drive, elastic bass, and vocals that felt like midnight testimony. In 1997, he won the Grammy for Remixer of the Year, one of the first times the mainstream formally saluted a DJ as a creator, not just a selector. Knuckles was a gay black pioneer in a scene that offered freedom but not always safety, and he kept his romantic life private. In the mid-2000s, he battled type 2 diabetes. Complications after a foot injury led to an amputation, yet he continued touring. He died in Chicago on March 31, 2014, at 59. Today, every modern house anthem, whether in a basement, a beach party, or a stadium, still carries his fingerprints. Tracy Chapman. Tracy Chapman, born March 30, 1964 in Cleveland, Ohio, emerged in the late 1980s as a steady countercurrent to an era of shiny excess. Raised by her mother in a working-class neighborhood, she learned guitar young and began writing with a reporter's ear for everyday struggle bills on the table, dreams held together by grit and the quiet ways people survive. While studying anthropology at Tufts University, she played small rooms around Boston until a demo reached Elektra Records. Her self-titled debut album arrived in 1988 and became a phenomenon. Fast Car raced into the pop top 10. Talking About a Revolution became a movement hymn, and Baby Can I Hold You proved she could break hearts as cleanly as she could raise questions. Chapman's style is built on restraint. Her smoky contralto, simple chord progressions, and uncluttered production leave space for stories to hit like truth instead of theater. A last-minute performance at the Nelson Mandela 70th birthday tribute concert at Wembley Stadium in June 1988 pushed her onto the world stage and cemented her as a voice of social conscience without ever sounding preachy. Which of her songs still feels like it's talking directly to your life? That intimacy carried through later work, such as Crossroads 1989 and New Beginning 1995, where Give Me One Reason brought a bluesy spark back to mainstream radio. Fiercely private, Chapman has never marketed her personal life. Writer Alice Walker has said they were partners in the mid-1990s, and Chapman has offered no further detail. After years away from celebrity glare, Fast Car found new life via Luke Combs' 2023 cover, earning Chapman a historic Country Music Association Song of the Year in 2024. Her legacy remains a reminder that quiet voices can change a culture. Michelle Ndegeocello. Michelle Ndegeocello, born Michelle Lynn Johnson in West Berlin on August 29, 1968, and raised in Washington, D.C., is a bassist-songwriter who has spent her life refusing musical borders. She cut her teeth in the late 80s go-go circuit, then signed to Madonna's Maverick label, and broke out with the 1993 debut Plantation Lullabies. The album braided funk, hip-hop, jazz, and spoken word earned major Grammy nominations and is now viewed as a cornerstone of neo-soul. Its single, If That's Your Boyfriend. He Wasn't Last Night became a sly statement on desire and honesty, announcing her as both storyteller and provocateur. Soon after, she widened her audience by duetting with John Mellencamp on a hit cover of Wild Night, but she never let pop success cage her sound. Ndjeo Cello has been open about being bisexual, and her early androgynous image challenged gender expectations in black music long before the culture caught up. Through the 1990s and 2000s, she kept zigzagging the lush R&B of Peace Beyond Passion, 1996, the sharp social critique of Bitter, 1999, and the adventurous collage of Cookie, the anthropological mixtape, 2002. Instead of chasing trends, she pursued craft bass lines that talk lyrics that question grooves that refuse easy comfort. In the 2020s, she leaned toward expansive jazz-rooted concept projects, including tributes to Nina Simone and James Baldwin. Her 2023 set, The Omnichord Real Book, won the first Grammy for Best Alternative Jazz Album in 2024, and Tutti 24's No More Water. The Gospel of James Baldwin took the same honor in 2025. Michelle's legacy isn't one hit or one genre. It's permission to live in more than one lane, sonically, emotionally, and personally. Little Richard. Little Richard born. Richard Wayne Penniman in Macon, Georgia on December 5, 1932, was the shaken bottle that sprayed rock and roll across America. Raised in a strict Seventh-day Adventist household, he grew up singing in church, then slipped into the juke joint circuit where blues, boogie-woogie, and gospel collided after midnight. By the early 1950s, he was performing with flamboyance that would have been dangerous for most black men in the Jim Crow South. Heavy makeup, bright suits, and a sky-high pompadour that turned him into a human exclamation point. When Tutti Frutti burst out in 1955, followed by Long Tall, Sally Rip It Up, and Good Golly Miss Molly, his pounding piano and ecstatic yelp didn't just sell records, they rewrote the rules of popular music. Behind that hurricane of sound lived a lifelong tug-of-war. Richard was openly queer in many early circles, then repeatedly tried to suppress or reframe that part of himself under religious pressure. He left secular stages for gospel more than once, returned again, then condemned homosexuality publicly, before later softening his stance. How do you reconcile a heart that wants freedom with a faith that demands restraint? That question sits at the center of his story, not as gossip, but as the engine of his volatility. Wild charisma on Saturday night, fierce repentance on Sunday morning. Even with that inner struggle, his impact is unmistakable. He gave James Brown his showmanship blueprint, inspired the Beatles' early energy, lit a route for Prince's erotic swagger, and made space for generations of boundary-breaking black performers. Little Richard died on May 9, 2020, but every scream, backbeat, and glittering flourish in modern music still carries his spark. Billy Strayhorn. Billy Strayhorn. November 29, 1915, May 31st, 1967, was a Philadelphia-born composer whose brilliance quietly shaped the sound of 20th-century black jazz. Trained in classical piano and fascinated by theater, Strayhorn carried a storyteller's mind into music harmonies that felt like city lights at midnight, melodies that turned longing into architecture. He met Duke Ellington in 1938 after sending him a fan letter and a few scores. Ellington recognized the genius, immediately bringing Strayhorn into his orchestra not as a sideman, but as an equal creative engine. Over nearly 3 decades, Strayhorn became Ellington's closest musical partner, writing or co-writing some of the band's most enduring works, including Take the A Train, the orchestra's signature theme, Lush Life Chelsea Bridge, and The Sweet, Such Sweet Thunder. His arrangements added shimmer, surprise, and modernist edge, helping Ellington's band stay ahead of every wave. Strayhorn was also one of the rare black public figures of his era who lived openly gay within his artistic world. He did not stage marriages or invent girlfriends for press photos. Instead, he protected a private domestic life among trusted friends, even while navigating racism and homophobia in parallel. Diagnosed with esophageal cancer, he kept composing until the end. Strayhorn's legacy isn't only in famous tunes, it's in the elegance of understatement proof that the most powerful revolutions in sound can come from someone standing just off the spotlight, shaping it anyway. Gladys Bentley. Gladys Bentley, August 12, 1907, January 18, 1960, was a Harlem Renaissance original who turned performance into defiance. Born in Philadelphia, she ran away to New York as a teenager and found her stage at speakeasies like the Clam House and the Ubangi Club. There, Bentley built a persona no one could ignore: tuxedo or white suit, top hat, cane, and a booming, playful voice that mashed blues riffs with improvised, often risque lyrics. She sat at the piano like she owned the night, flirting with women in the crowd, roasting men with humor, and bending every rule of proper womanhood. By the late 1920s, she was one of Harlem's highest-paid entertainers, a headliner in a scene that celebrated black artistry at full volume. Bentley's gender expression and attraction to women were not a secret in her early career. They were part of the show and part of her everyday life. She reportedly had long relationships with women, even describing a marriage to her partner in private circles, though such unions had no legal standing then. Imagine living that openly. What kind of bravery would it take in the 1930s? Her rise, however, collided with a colder America. As Prohibition ended, and the 1950s brought McCarthy-era crackdowns on queer life, Bentley faced intense pressure to conform. She moved to Los Angeles, began wearing dresses in public, and published essays claiming she had been cured. A shift many historians read as survival rather than transformation. She died at 52, often remembered more for her scandal than her craft. Yet her real legacy is larger. A black queer woman who claimed space in an industry built to erase her. In every drag king, every gender-bending blues shouter, and every artist who refuses neat labels, Bentley's spirit still tips its hat. On Legends of Black Excellence, we've revisited 21 music giants, whose love lives often had to stay off stage, from Big Mama Thornton's swaggering blues to Luther Vandross's velvet ballads, from Billy Strayhorn's jazz elegance to Sylvester's disco freedom. Some stories rest on biographies and public testimony. Others survive as whispers shaped by an era that punished open queerness. Either way, their songs carried truths the world wouldn't let them speak. Listening now, we hear survival, not scandal, and a sense of love. Debate time: do we honor their privacy by leaving labels aside, or honor them by naming what history hid?